ke mwen te fè 7 ti moun avèk arime se do men mi tale, bakon esiye tet li dekoupe nan bakon, yo vin di mwen.
Filming an interview is one of the most important steps to being able to tell a great story. Because it's this process where all the preliminary work, all the research you've done, all the discussions, is now time for you to kind of capture this person or one particular person's story on video. So there's a few tips. If you're going to film them on camera, a few tips I'd always suggest for generally for an interview are to make sure that the background is a little bit darker than the person. So this is going to mean that the person's going to stand out a little bit from the background, and it's going to force the person to draw their attention to the person rather than what's going on behind them in the interview shot. If you're in an area where you don't necessarily have any lights, a few recommendations are to go inside and look to see how you can use windows. So there's always creative ways you can use windows, doors, close curtains, open curtains, turn off the lights to get a little bit more dramatic feeling. So even if you don't have expensive lights to take with you, I strongly recommend finding ways that you can maximize the lighting and get creative. This is about your eye and creativity, not just about gear. Fortunately, LED lights have really come down in the last years, and there's a few great lights out there that are battery powered and that will really just get a little kicker. Sometimes you don't need much just to light someone's face up, put a light behind them to the side and make it look a little bit more dramatic. Once you have the lighting down, a few good steps to getting the person to come out well are just to get them to sit down, get them to relax. I mean, everyone, myself included, when a camera comes out, you can't help but get a little bit tense, you get a little bit, everything's abnormal, your every move is being watched on camera, and you tend to get a little bit uptight and not nearly as relaxed. And so part of it is just, relax, get the person to talk a little bit, about their family or whatever it is that helps gets their mind off the fact that there's a camera there and people watching their every move. So a few other tips, whenever I'm doing an interview, I like to get people to spell their name right then on camera. I don't know about you, but I'm terrible about keeping track of paper. Sometimes I'll put a note in my phone, but just as a general good habit, I really like getting people to spell their name. That way I have it, and that way if I'm editing the video a few months later, I don't have to try to find a piece of paper with their name on it. It's right there on camera. You have them saying that there. And then two, one of the things you can do if you are trying to get permission, you can always just get oral permission on camera, saying I give permission to so-and-so to use my interview. That is not a bad idea too, especially if you're in an area where people are illiterate or there's just language barriers. Sometimes carrying pieces of paper that grant consent. It's just easier to be upfront with people so that way they know how you're using the video and get them to agree to it on camera. And this is especially too in more so in areas that are a little more litigious. So if you're more a developing country, it's more about respecting their story and how you're using it rather than worrying about being sued. But it's always good to get consent and make sure people understand how you're going to use their interview. So one of the things that's important to do is just, you want people to, sometimes you get people that will give you a long answer. You ask them a short question, they give you a really long answer. And then other times you ask a question and people give you a really short answer. So sometimes it's really big balancing act to get the right thing. And sometimes people don't really understand if you ask them to repeat something. They might say, well, as I already told you, and you have to be like, no, can we stop back? People aren't going to hear your previous response. We just want to hear you say it again. And sometimes there's a bit of coaching. So don't be afraid to stop and ask people, hey, can you repeat that? Or what was that? One of the things I like to do is get people to tell their story so they relax and they open up to you. But then towards the end of the video, go back and ask them to repeat crucial spots that you want. That way you're not stopping them every 5 minutes, every 2 minutes to repeat something, but you get their full story. Then at the end, ask yourself, well, what was most memorable? And then go back and get them to say those things again. So people will have a hard time repeating you at times, depending on how used to the interview process they are, but just coach them along and be patient with them. So a few tips if you're using an interpreter. It's obviously best if you have an interpreter right there who can speak, say what they're saying. I strongly recommend make sure you get the person's audio on camera, whether it's an onboard mic or the microphone. Make sure that you know what they're saying. If it's an especially complicated situation, like there have been a few times where we were working with a remote area and we actually had to translate what they were saying twice The person was translating for a person who was translating into English. So in that case, it was a really important story, and I really wanted to get it right. And so what I made sure is that night when we were back at the hotel, I pulled out the interview, got it out, and then right then typed in the captions as they were going along, because I wanted to make sure that I got the person's story. I wanted to make sure that they knew what they said. So that's just one of the tips for dealing with interpreters, is it definitely makes things more complicated, but there's definitely ways around it. And lastly, I just thought we should let you know that we feel that there's an overall trend towards just not using talking heads in general when it comes to telling someone's story. So we have actually stopped, in many situations, we actually just didn't use a camera to capture someone's story and just did it purely with audio. And in some ways, the effect that this had is that people tend to relax a little bit more. They're not worried about how they look. You save the time of setting up for a camera, because usually what would happen is we'd get a camera, we'd set it up, we want the lighting to look good, we'd spend all this time, and then really it was just, at the end of the day, we were trying to cover up the person with as much engaging B-roll as possible. So we actually just started just completely recording an audio to get people relaxed a little bit more. We've been really happy with the product. We haven't once had people say, "Oh, I really missed the talking head in your video. Where was the talking head?" No, it didn't happen. So, but I know it definitely takes a big commitment, because you have to have plenty of engaging B-roll that you can completely cover up the person. So if you're not sure that you'll get it, you can always film with a camera with the interview a few times, and then later if you decide to just completely cover it up, but you still have that option of cutting back. So it's up to you, but just feel free to experiment. When you're doing a video with a person, get as much engaging B-roll as you can, cover the interview completely up, and see if you have anyone ask you, where is this person talking? The truth is, when it's a good story, people get engaged to it, and when you see a talking head, it kind of reminds you, oh, I'm actually not watching a story, I'm listening to someone talk, which kind of can ruin the mood sometimes. But go out and tell great stories.